I've been debunked on the Holodomor again. Again, it's like the 50th time this has happened. I just keep getting debunked by people who are actually not even showing people what I said in my video, but who pretend to be debunking it. Interesting. So a guy who has replaced any sort of academic rigor or research ability or ability to analyze evidence with a preconceived conclusion and a British accent attempted to debunk my video on the Holodomor. Let's check that out. So here is the video in question. It's made by Dan Djurdjevic, writer and musician. You might notice an immediate problem here if you have eyes and you know anything about my video on the matter. So my video on the matter is 1 hour and 37 minutes long. This response is 7 minutes long. So immediately we have to wonder what's going on here. How could you possibly refute an hour and 37-minute long video in 7 minutes? Not even how could you possibly refute it, rather, how could you even possibly accurately present its arguments and its evidence to then refute them in just 7 minutes? That's impossible. Like, that stage alone it would take at least 20 to 30 minutes. And ideally, you'd want to actually show the whole thing so that people can accurately see what the person is saying to know that you aren't misrepresenting them. So immediately we have a pretty clear fucking problem here. Not only is it not possible at all for him to have adequately refuted my video in just 7 minutes, but it's not even possible for him to present his audience, to present the viewer, with an adequate representation of my arguments and the evidence that I'm using to support them. And you'll see he doesn't even remotely come close to doing that. What he does is argue against a straw man, and he barely even manages to beat his own little straw man. I would say he actually kind of loses to it because he himself, in this entire video, does not present a single source. He doesn't present any evidence. It is a guy looking into a camera intensely with a British accent, just insisting that I am wrong and he is right, based on, well, he doesn't actually give you much of a basis to believe that, aside from, dude, trust me. And it was immediately clear to me from a specific detail here that what happened is that he actually asked AI to summarize my video for him. He didn't actually watch it himself. You can tell because he doesn't actually even remotely approximate what my actual arguments were. I'll show you proof of this, don't worry. And you can tell because he got extremely basic details that anyone with any sort of familiarity on the topic here, which is the academic debate over whether the Holodomor was an intentional genocide of Ukrainians or not, he gets details on that so totally wrong in a way that someone who knew about this issue would never ever get so wrong. So what happened here is very, very clear. He asked AI to summarize my video for him. He read the AI summary of my video, and then he asked the AI to give him a rebuttal to my video that was in line with his own preconceived beliefs that he held already before he ever came close to beginning to analyze the academic debate on the topic. That it was an intentional genocide of Ukrainians. That's his position. I find it very funny, by the way, that he has 7 sources cited here, and he very clearly does not cite any of them. He doesn't actually cite any of them even once. They're just rather here so he can sort of posture as having cited sources or as having read something. He hasn't read any of this. So he makes a claim here that makes it very clear that he was fed an incorrect answer from AI, because AI will very famously, if you phrase your question in a way that makes it clear that you want a specific answer, it will go to pains to satisfy you. So he clearly asked AI here for a loaded answer, and it gave him one that lied to him, and he repeated it uncritically because he doesn't know enough about the topic to have spotted this immediate error that anyone who knew about the topic would have easily gotten and corrected. Here, I'll show you.
It's also worth noting that other historians who initially rejected the genocide label, like James Mace, shifted over time as more documents became available. So did Robert Conquest, whose later work aligned more closely with the genocide consensus, contrary to what Bad Empanada claims.
If you know anything about this, which a lot more people do know about this than most general academic debates, you will know that everything that he just said is the opposite of the truth. The academic genocide thesis, not the thesis rather the discussion, the academic discussion on whether this was a genocide or not, was initiated by James Mace and Robert Conquest. James Mace was the first who did it in 1984, and Robert Conquest did it 2 years later in 1986 with his book The Harvest of Sorrow, which James Mace was a research assistant on. These were the two who popularized the academic debate about whether the Holodomor was an intentional genocide of Ukrainians. He is saying the exact opposite here, and you have to really fuck up to get AI to get this so wrong. Like, you have to give it a really loaded question. Like, we can see, for example, if you ask AI, like James Mace and Robert Conquest, Holodomor genocide thesis, AI immediately shits out to you. James Mace and Robert Conquest collaborate on the Holodomor genocide thesis. James Mace, a historian, helped Robert Conquest research and write The Harvest of Sorrow, a seminal work on the Holodomor famine in Ukraine. Mace's work, particularly his research for the US Commission on the Ukraine famine, also strongly supported the conclusion that the Holodomor constituted genocide. So if you look at one of James Mace's very early articles on this. He wrote an article in the Los Angeles Times in 1986 called The Secret of Ukrainian Genocide Must Not Be Forgotten Tragedy. In The Harvest of Sorrow, which he was a research assistant on with Robert Conquest, and also from 1986, Conquest's thesis was characterized as the famine was deliberately inflicted for ethnic reasons. It was done in order to undermine the Ukrainian nation, or that it constituted genocide. So this guy asked the AI such a loaded question that he somehow got it to tell him the exact opposite of the reality, which is that Robert Conquest and James Mace were actually the two who began the academic debate. They weren't the originators of the idea that was a genocide, because obviously people before them had come up with that idea, but they were the originators of the academic discussion on whether or not it constituted one. They first wrote articles and books that put forward that idea in history academia itself. So this guy somehow asked the AI such a loaded question that it got just basic facts about the academic discussion on this issue, which is what my video was about, completely and totally wrong. And he pretends to be debunking me. This is absolutely someone who asked AI to summarize my video. He did not watch it, and then he asked AI to debunk a summary of my video, and the AI told him something that is just completely and totally false, in which he credited James Mace and Robert Conquest as two people who changed their mind as more information came to light, when the reality is that they were the originators of the thesis. James Mace didn't change his mind. He died pretty early in 2004, so he didn't have much of a chance to change his mind based on new scholarship. And Robert Conquest did, heavily new to his earlier position in correspondence with Stephen Wheatcroft and Robert Davies, which I go over in my video. His original position was that the famine was deliberately inflicted to kill Ukrainians. Here is what Conquest wrote in this letter that he wrote to Stephen Wheatcroft and Robert Davies, in which he dialed back his opinion. When writing to them, he heavily dialed back these conclusions, instead stating that Stalin purposefully inflicted the 1933 famine? No. What I argue is that with resulting famine imminent, he could have prevented it, but put Soviet interest other than feeding the starving first, thus consciously abetting it. So, that is quite a different thesis to the original thesis and the one that the author of this supposed rebuttal to me is putting forth. His idea is that the famine was intentionally inflicted in order to genocide Ukrainians. That was also Robert Conquest's original position. As more evidence became available, Robert Conquest, who to be clear described himself as a cold warrior, that is someone who intentionally released propaganda against the Soviet Union. So his opinion here isn't fact, it's just his opinion. And nonetheless means something that someone like him who would describe himself in such a way, who was clearly biased against the Soviet Union, would dial back their opinion from this was an intentional genocide designed to kill Ukrainians to rather the famine was caused by neglect and the government didn't care enough about it, which resulted in, more people dying or suffering than needed to, because, they put Soviet interest over feeding the starving. Those are two different conclusions. The first one is genocide, the second isn't. So this guy he got things completely wrong here, just off the bat. He doesn't even know the basics about the two people who originated this thesis, an error that someone who was at all familiar with the academic debate would have immediately spotted. This is someone who reads scripts written for him by AI that he does not have the requisite knowledge to fact check to a camera in a confident British sounding accent. Okay? So now I'm going to do what he didn't do to me, what he didn't do for me, rather, and I'm going to watch his entire video and I'm going to refute it. He does not show people what I actually said. He does not cite a single source. He does not even quote me directly even once. He just fights a straw man and pretends to be refuting a 1 hour and 37-minute long video in 7 minutes. So let's see what he has to say.
It's astonishing how one overconfident YouTuber can influence thousands of viewers.
This is the funniest assertion I've ever seen, given what we know about him and his incredible overconfidence when he makes such a basic error inverting the actual reality, as I just went over.
Into historical distortion. That's what's happening with Bad Empanada's 97-minute takedown of the Holodomor Wikipedia page, a video that's being cited by Holodomor denialists as gospel.
Define Holodomor denialist, because I don't deny the Holodomor at all, as in the famine happened. The famine happened and killed millions of Ukrainians. I don't deny that one bit. So what do you mean by Holodomor denial, as in the genocide thesis? Is that what the Holodomor specifically term means to you? If it does, then that is in fact a loaded supposition that we can actually academically analyze and argue the evidence for. Something that you clearly didn't, given that you don't even fucking know the basics of the academic discussion on the matter, as I just proved.
I came across it while posting educational content on the Holodomor.
I don't think you're fit to post educational content on the Holodomor. You do not know the basics about anything resembling the academic discussion on it.
Famine of 1932 to 33 that killed between 3.5 and 5 million Ukrainians and millions of others across the USSR. I was told my careful analysis had...
How careful is your analysis when you get something that basic wrong from the get-go?
...already been debunked by this one guy with a beard and a grudge against Wikipedia. Well, let's be...
So far, man, I've just been refuted here really well, haven't I?
This isn't about Wikipedia. This is about genocide denial, of the same kind that Holocaust deniers peddle.
Oh man, this is going to be hard for him to justify.
The tactics are identical. Discredit the sources, cherry-pick your scholars, imply a...
Discredit the sources, cherry-pick your scholars. For one, there are no scholars. There is not one single scholar, not one legitimate scholar taken seriously who denies the Holocaust happened. And two, comparing this to Holocaust denial isn't exactly the same thing, because very few details about the offense are in dispute. The question are not the details. The question are, does this amount to a genocide? Is it an intentional campaign to kill Ukrainians for being Ukrainians? So there's a big difference here between the Holocaust denial, which is this event literally did not happen, and what you call Holodomor denial here, which you characterize my opinion as, and my opinion is that the details are all there, aside from like documents on, made up stories about the intent of the people who did this. They're not in dispute. That the famine happened, that all these people died, is not in dispute. The question is, how did this happen? Why did it happen? Which, to be clear, this is also debated about the Holocaust. People talk about, I've talked about this before. Why did the Holocaust happen? How could it have happened? What was the motivation of the people who did it? These are all things for which there are real academic discussions. What isn't up for academic discussions is, did it happen? So you're dishonestly characterizing my position as, I don't believe the famine happened, which is what you would have to be characterizing it for this Holocaust, like Holocaust denial comparison to work. You clearly don't know anything about Holocaust denial either. I don't think you know anything about what you're talking about.
Vast nationalist conspiracy and ignore overwhelming evidence. So
where's the overwhelming evidence? In this video, you literally do not show us a single shred of evidence. It's just your face looking at the camera.
So let's get into it. Bad Empanada opens by spending over 8 minutes attacking the structure of a Wikipedia page.
The entire rest of the video is dedicated to refuting the Wikipedia page's presentation of these sources and going in depth on what the sources say and do. An entire 8 minutes. Does that seem like too long for you? You say spending 8 minutes on going over the structure of Wikipedia, talking about it as a platform, how it works, how this page could potentially be misleading as a result of this structure of Wikipedia, is like in of itself ridiculous. No, I think you're just a very stupid person. I think you're someone who has confused brevity, and which is you just making shit up, with substance. So you are just immediately trying to discredit me in every way possible rather than actually analyzing the evidence that I presented, because you don't know anything about the fucking subject, do you? I proved that immediately here before I even got to this point.
The history, the facts, or the archives.
Not the history, the facts, or the archives. My video is all about those things. Literally, one by one, I go into every single source listed on the Wikipedia page. I read them, I analyzed them. You are a fucking liar. You didn't watch my video. You read an AI summary of my video. Your entire video isn't even 8 minutes. You know how he knows it's 8 minutes? Because the first section of the video called on Wikipedia is 8 minutes. The first 8 minutes of the video are not about talking about the structure of the Wikipedia page. The first 8 minutes of the video are about Wikipedia. I don't actually get to the Wikipedia page until 8 minutes and 45 seconds in. You can tell he didn't watch my video at all because he doesn't know that. He just looked at the chapter title on Wikipedia and he assumed it was about me analyzing the Holodomor Wikipedia page. You liar. You got this from ChatGPT. You got this from ChatGPT. You don't even write your own videos.
But the layout. He treats formatting choices as if they're evidence of propaganda. Let's just say this up front.
Like what? Which formatting choice? Cite evidence for your claims.
Wikipedia is not a primary source. It's a community-edited tertiary reference. Its citation...
What the fuck are you saying here that you think refutes anything that I said? How is this relevant to anything that I said? You haven't presented anything that I said. You don't even remotely come close to accurately representing what I said in the first 8 minutes of the video, which is purely about saying precisely what you're saying here and how this could possibly result in Wikipedia being biased. I didn't even get to the Holodomor wiki page until 9 minutes in. You are a lying moron.
Order, headings, or list formatting have no bearing on whether the Holodomor was genocide.
When did I say that in my video? The AI lied to you and you just repeated everything that it said.
Any critique of Wikipedia must be separated from the...
I analyzed both the Wikipedia page, how this information is presented there, and I analyzed each and every source individually. There are people who actually watched this and thought this refuted me. Oh my God.
The actual historical record. Even then, his argument isn't honest. He claims Wikipedia favors the genocide recognition side by listing weak sources first, like Simon Peyerslin's entry on Oxford bibliographies. But
yeah, and?
Then he turns to Michael Ellman, one of his stronger sources, and he neglects to mention that Ellman also calls the famine politically intentional and leaves open the genocide question depending on how intent.
He didn't watch the video. AI told him the wrong thing that I said about the video. I'm literally going to debunk him here by just playing what I said in the video about Ellman's stance. Here is me talking about Ellman's stance. I'm going to refute this by just playing the video that this guy pertains to have watched and pertains to be debunking. What happened here is he asked AI for a summary on it, and the AI lied to him because he gave the AI a loaded despective question because he was trying to justify his preconceived beliefs. And AI notoriously will try to satisfy whatever prompt you give it. It will try to make you happy, basically, and it will lie to you if needed to do that. That's what happened here. It lied to him about the content of my video, it lied to him about the sources, and basically everything surrounding the academic discussion on this. This is so fucking embarrassing. This is not my opinion. This is me summarizing Ellman's stance, which directly contradicts what he just said about my summary of Ellman's stance. So while by his assessment, many of the famine deaths can be attributed to Stalin's callous response and his poor agricultural policies, he would still support a verdict of not guilty, or possibly the Scottish verdict of not proven, for the crime of genocide specifically. Ellman does, however, go on to state that under a broader definition of genocide, which is used by many academics who study genocide, the famine might indeed be considered genocide. Under this definition, a more specific intent is not required. Rather, the offender is culpable because he knew or should have known that the act would destroy, in whole or in part, a group. So it wouldn't matter whether or not there's evidence that the Soviet government wanted to target Ukrainians. What matters is simply that they took actions that they should have or did know would result in the deaths of Ukrainians or fail to save them from death. However... Okay, so that is my summary of Ellman's opinion. It is literally precisely what you said I neglected to mention.
Stronger sources, and he neglects to mention that Ellman also calls the famine politically intentional and leaves open the genocide question depending on how intent is interpreted under international law.
So you yourself accurately summarized his stance. His actual stance is that under the international legal definition, it wouldn't be genocide. He actually argued specifically in court that if it was tried as genocide, it would probably be ruled as not guilty or not proven. He then, however, goes on to argue that under a wider definition of genocide, often used in academia, it could be considered genocide.
Ellman writes.
He's literally quoting the Ellman excerpt that I showed in my video. This is unbelievable. Then according to this relaxed definition of intent, he was guilty of genocide. To prove me wrong, to prove that I did not accurately cite Ellman, he cites Ellman saying what I myself showed him saying.
If a relaxed definition of genocide, Stalin knew or should have known the implication of his agricultural policy, is applied, the Great Famine constitutes genocide.
Here's me in the video. Genocide, the famine might indeed be considered genocide. Under this definition, a more specific intent is not required. Rather, the offender is culpable because he knew or should have known that the act would destroy, in whole or in part, a group. I hope this response to you completely ruins your attempt at having an online influencer career. This is deeply embarrassing for you.
That's from Stalin and the Soviet Famine of 1932 to 33 Revisited, one of his papers, and it's on paper.
Which Ellman paper did I cite here? Which Ellman paper am I extensively citing in this video? Stalin and the Soviet Famine of 1932 to 33 Revisited by Michael Ellman. You fucking idiot. This is deeply embarrassing for you.
Page 688. He also ignores that Wikipedia cites Serhii Plokhy, Timothy Snyder, and Anne Applebaum, all of whom had...
For one, it did not cite Anne Applebaum when I made this video in 2022, and it shouldn't cite Anne Applebaum because she's a journalist and not a historian. However, and I extensively went over the Timothy Snyder section in this fucking video where you claim I ignored that. Now, the last one, Timothy Snyder, and I love it when I ignore the guy who I literally talked about extensively in my video. Like, I spent at least 10 minutes just talking about Timothy Snyder's part of the video. That's longer than your entire video. I went over every single person who was cited in the video at the time when I went over, who was cited in the Wikipedia article, rather, at the time when I went over it. Serhii Plokhy, Anne Applebaum were not cited in it when I went over it. There is no one between those two names who was there when I cited it. So, are you like so technologically inept that you don't realize that Wikipedia can be edited?
He acts as if these citations are padding, when in fact they are the basis of the modern consensus.
No, there's no modern consensus on this. There is not a modern consensus in the slightest. You're not proving that in the slightest either. What's your evidence for a modern consensus? Timothy Snyder, Bloodlands. Not a well-regarded academic text. It's understood as a popular historical text. And I went into this in my video. Anne Applebaum, who just rehashes Robert Conquest and James Mace's thesis while ignoring new information that has come out since. That's why she's a journalist and not a historian. She's also extremely well known as an incredibly politically biased source, even way more than Robert Conquest.
Bad empanada keeps saying, there's no academic consensus, but this only works if you take consensus to mean unanimity, which isn't how scholarly consensus works.
How does it work then? Because if anything, there is a much stronger consensus against the genocide thesis following the opening of the Soviet archives.
The UN definition of genocide.
Oh, the UN definition of genocide. I don't know what that is. I've never talked about that before. I was actually trying to hide the UN definition of genocide. I didn't talk about it at all in my video on the matter. I've never spoken about this before. I don't have specific videos about how specifically the UN Genocide Convention was drafted, its problems, and the jurisprudence surrounding it. This is an entire video on the topic that is on my channel. This is another video on the topic that's on my channel. This one specifically surrounding the jurisprudence on the topic, the precedents on the topic, the international law precedents on the topic.
And the jurisprudence of the International Criminal Court don't require every scholar to agree.
Why are you talking about this? This is an academic question because there is no international court case, there is no ICJ case regarding genocide. And if you want to go that route, you're opening a big fucking can of worms because like, as we just said, as Michael Ellman, who you cited as someone who, according to you, supposedly supports your thesis, said that if this was actually tried in court, it would be found Stalin and his government would be found not guilty. So you don't want to invoke this.
Require a preponderance of evidence and qualified analysis. So let's be clear. The majority of Holodomor scholars today view the famine as genocide under the genocide.
Everyone who you've cited so far is not a Holodomor scholar. Anne Applebaum is not a Holodomor specialist. She's a journalist, not even a historian. Timothy Snyder is not a Holodomor specialist either. Timothy Snyder is not specialized in this topic. He wrote one rather polemic book which happened to cover the topic for the purpose of comparing the Soviet Union to the Nazis. That is not a Holodomor scholar. So how is there a consensus on this? This includes Timothy Snyder. That's the next one he goes.
This includes Timothy Snyder.
He is not a Holodomor scholar. And the book that you cite isn't even specifically a book on the Holodomor. Anne Applebaum.
Bloodlands, who emphasizes that Ukraine was singled out by the regime.
There's a consensus. Here, I'm going to specifically cite a couple of scholars, and by citing them, I do not actually prove a consensus in the slightest.
Anne Applebaum.
I could list scholars who have the opposite opinion, who are actually way more specialized on this topic, and who think it wasn't a genocide. Stephen Wheatcroft, Robert Davies, Sheila Fitzpatrick, Mark Torger, who I don't agree with on his specific argument, but he also thinks it wasn't a genocide. I just do not understand how you're so confident on this. And you just name names. I can name names as well, and the names that I throw out are also much more specialized in this specific topic than the ones that you're throwing out, especially more so than Anne Applebaum.
Red Famine, who cites Soviet directives that targeted ethnic Ukrainians. Serhii Plokhy, who uses...
Why don't you show us this supposed evidence? Why do you just say it exists rather than showing
archive
it?
Material to show the coordinated nature of grain seizures, border closures, and information suppression. And even...
You're citing Raphael fucking Lemkin? Raphael Lemkin? You're citing as evidence of your present-day academic consensus in the matter? Your evidence is Anne Applebaum, a journalist, not a historian, and an open and proud right-wing journalist at that. Most of her work is like Anne Applebaum's work is that Anne Applebaum wrote articles supporting the Iraq War. That is what her job actually is. And she just happened on the side to write a book in which she rehashed the Robert Conquest thesis about genocide. That's your citation. Who's the other one? Timothy Snyder. He wrote one book covering the topic in no depth at all, and who I went over in my video on the topic, just ignored sources. In order to refute this, I could just play my entire Snyder section, but I'd rather not because it's like 10, 15 minutes long. And then he cites Raphael Lemkin, who's only ever covered the Holodomor in one 4-page long speech on the matter, in which he cites no sources and brands it a genocide at a time when he had incredibly limited information. This was 1951, I believe. Just because he coined the term genocide doesn't mean that whatever he says goes. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have to analyze the evidence. It doesn't mean that we don't get to consider further developments in new evidence that have come forth since. You're making an idiotic appeal to authority here. Everyone who you're citing as an example of a supposed consensus aren't even valid sources regarding your supposition that there is a consensus. Like, what if we look at the Holodomor genocide question Wikipedia article here? I can tell you right now he got all of this from AI. I don't know how it's been changed since. Arch Getty was another one, by the way, who was against the genocide thesis. Someone who was also a specialist in the Soviet Union. And so this is just shut out by AI. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here and assume that guy is at least a Holodomor scholar. But the other ones who he cited, all 3 of them are not even close. And that's his example of there being a consensus. 3 of the weakest examples that he could have come up with. If we go over the article as it is today, people who were way more specialized in the Soviet Union who think differently. John Archibald Getty, specifically a Soviet Union historian specialized in the Soviet Union. Mark Torger, who is specifically specialized in famine. Robert Davies and Stephen Wheatcroft, Soviet Union specialists. Stephen Kotkin, who is a right-wing guy politically, but who thinks there wasn't a genocide. If you look at the article itself, it presents more or less an even split on the matter of actual academic sources. Anne Applebaum is not included in the article because she's not considered by Wikipedia to be a valid academic source because she's a journalist. So your evidence of there being a consensus in the opposite way is totally wrong. Just completely and totally wrong. And the people you set aside in the article, like Anne Applebaum, isn't actually even there. How fucking embarrassing.
Raphael Lemkin, who literally coined the term genocide and described the Holodomor in 1953 as perhaps the classic example of Soviet genocide. And here's where Bad Empanada contradicts himself. He argues that modern recognition of the Holodomor is a result of Ukrainian nationalist lobbying.
I said at one single point at the end of the video that the Ukrainian government has been lobbying to get international recognition of the Holodomor. This is just a fact. The Armenian government also lobbies to get international recognition of the Armenian genocide. And that is in part why we know more about these two things, why people are more conscious of them. But the thing is, both of them are doing this for political reasons. Does that mean the Armenian genocide didn't happen? No. Does that mean the Holodomor is not a genocide? These two questions, both of them aren't based on what the governments of these countries says or what any other government says. They're based on analysis of the facts. This was the point that I was making here. The reason why you're making this video is certainly in part due to the lobbying. The very reason why Robert Conquest, by the way, wrote his video is because of a very interesting fact that he was kind of commissioned to write it by an entity called the Ukrainian Research Institute. This is fucking 100% well documented and known. The Ukrainian Research Institute approached Conquest with a major project, a book on the 1932-33 famine, and they paid him $80,000 to write it. So this is simple fact. What I said there is fact. You certainly can't refute these facts by bringing up Lemkin. What the fuck does that have to do with anything?
But then tries to dismiss Lemkin's 1953 speech as irrelevant because it was written too early.
I dismiss it as irrelevant because it presents no evidence, and it came out before the vast majority of the evidence that we have now was even public. So yes, I can dismiss that, just as I dismiss, by the way, I dismiss old historical research in practically every circumstance, unless I know for a fact that nothing new has come up since the time that it was released, which is incredibly fucking rare. So what are you talking about? You can't have it both ways. You're just lying.
You can't have it both ways. Either the genocide narrative came from modern nationalist influence, or it came from the guy who invented the term long before Ukrainian independence.
Where in this did I ever argue that the genocide narrative came from them? The genocide narrative Didn't come from either of them. If anything, it came from Ukrainian nationalists in the diaspora in the 30s and 40s. That's where it came from. Everyone knows this. I never contested this, even in the slightest. I never said it came from Lemkin. What I said is that the academic narrative, the academic discussion on the topic began in the 1980s as a result of the work by Robert Conquest and James Mace, which was partly influenced by the fact that they were approached by Ukrainian nationalist organizations abroad who offered to pay them to produce a book on the topic, knowing that Robert Conquest was a highly anti-Soviet Union scholar. These are facts. You can't refute this, so you don't even try.
It's not both. Bad Empanada holds up Wheatcroft and Davies as his trump card.
My article covers a total of 13 sources, and you say that I only cite one of them as my supposed trump card. I'd love to see how you refute this. By the way, Wheatcroft and Davies are the most well-regarded scholars on this topic. Their work on the topic is cited by everyone, even those who disagree with them, because it was so enlightening, so new in what it presented and how thorough it was. So I would love to see how he tries to dispute what they have to say on the matter, and they are very vehement in that this wasn't a genocide.
Claiming they disproved the genocide thesis. But even they acknowledge that Stalin's regime bore direct responsibility for causing and prolonging the famine.
That's not the same thing as it being genocide. Them saying the famine was a result of bad agricultural policies and it involved an inadequate response, which caused more people to die, is not the same thing as your thesis and the thesis of the scholars who you are, or not, they're not even scholars, honestly, except Snyder in an unrelated field. The people who you're citing on this as evidence of your claim have a totally different interpretation, which is the famine was intentionally engineered to kill Ukrainians. These are two different opinions. You saying, but even they say this, does not further your argument, because you're arguing something that is wholly different to that, which, by the way, I agree with them saying that. It's very clear from my video that I agree with them saying that. What video you were debunking? Whatever the AI told you, it was lying to you.
Refusal to call it genocide hinges on their narrow interpretation of intent.
No, it doesn't hinge on their narrow interpretation of intent. It hinges to their adherence to the Genocide Convention. And it doesn't even matter, by the way, if there was a narrow interpretation of intent or not, because your argument is not, it should be called genocide because even if they didn't intend to kill Ukrainians, and nonetheless, they should have known that it had that their policies would cause that to happen. That's not your argument. Your argument is they caused the famine intentionally to kill Ukrainians. You are framing this dispute as something that it's not actually a dispute for. You're lying. You're moving the goalpost. That's not what your issue is here. Your issue is not a narrow definition of intent. Your issue is not that they're using the UN Genocide Convention definition. Otherwise, you wouldn't have cited the jurisprudence and the UN Convention yourself as some sort of exemplar earlier, because the fucking AI told you to do so, didn't it? Your issue, which you are slyly retreating from here and hoping I don't notice, is that you think it was a planned famine, planned with the intent to kill Ukrainians, and that the evidence, which many scholars argue, and these two you're citing here also argue, does not show that in the slightest. Just that it was terrible agricultural policy, and possibly this has been contradicted by evidence from the Soviet archives, an inadequate response to the famine.
Not on the absence of harm, targeting, or policy design. And that's a minority position among contemporary scholars.
No, it's not. Even the Wikipedia page itself, which you said I was ignoring here, shows pretty clearly that even from the scholars who they choose to present, it's about a 50-50 split.
It's also worth noting that other historians who
This is where we get to the part that I refuted at the beginning. I'm just going to let this play out because it's so deeply embarrassing.
Initially rejected the genocide label, like James Mace, shifted over time as more documents became available. So did Robert Conquest, whose later work aligned more closely with the genocide consensus.
This is the exact opposite of what happened. It's actually so crazy how bad he got this wrong. What I think happened here is he kept asking the AI to align with what he wants it to say. So it just altered reality, because what actually happened is as more evidence became available with the opening of the Soviet archives, opinions changed. Robert Conquest, who was one of the originators of the thesis, dialed back his opinion to not that it was intentionally inflicted to kill Ukrainians, but rather that the Soviet government put the broader, greater good, what they believe to be the greater good, over helping starving people who happen to be starving as a result of a famine caused by bad agricultural policy. That's not the same thing as his original thesis, which was that the famine was intentionally caused in order to kill Ukrainians. So what he's saying here is just wrong. As the Soviet archives opened, as more evidence became available, the genocide thesis became weaker because the genocide thesis was based on suppositions. It was based on saying this must have happened because of this. And until there's evidence that disproves this, you technically can't prove me wrong. And the Soviet archives open and they kind of put a wrench in that whole thing. And it's interesting here that all of the sources that he derides, particularly Wheatcroft and Torga, come from post-opening of the archives. And the sources that he holds up rely heavily on citing without acknowledging new evidence. This is something that I took particular exception with regarding Snyder, by the way, is that he cites new evidence, particularly from Wheatcroft and Davies in their book on the matter, but he does not actually try to refute their thesis, which is totally out of line with his own. And that is just bad academic practice.
Contrary to what Bad Empanada claims. He dismisses Timothy Snyder because Snyder draws parallels between Stalin's and Hitler's crimes. But Snyder isn't pushing a double genocide narrative to downplay the Holocaust. He's analyzing how both regimes used famine and mass death as tools of empire.
If you were going to analyze those things, first you would need to prove that what you were supposing was true. Snyder doesn't do that, and your summary of my argument is completely false and wrong, and obviously you got this from AI summarizing the video after you asked it numerous times to give you a summary that you found more amenable to the narrative that you want to push. And you frame that as the only exception that I took to Snyder's book, which is totally incorrect. Because the reason why Snyder's book is bad is not because of his aims in writing it, it's because it's bad. It's because it doesn't present adequate evidence for his claims. It's because it omits new scholarship that contradicts his claims, and it relies on old scholarship, particularly The Harvest of Sorrow by Robert Conquest, while citing new scholarship like Stephen Wheatcroft and Robert Davies, yet ignoring their thesis. In order to argue the genocide thesis, you'd have to deal with the sources that contradict you. And this is something that's characteristic in this debate, is that everyone that he cited here as proof of the genocide thesis, as scholars who argue for the genocide thesis, argue for it without refuting their opponents. Those who argue against the genocide thesis, Torga, Wheatcroft, Davies, these others, they argue against the arguments of those who suppose it was a genocide. One side ignores the arguments and the other side doesn't. That is extremely enlightening as to which side may have stronger arguments. Here is what I took exception with regarding Snyder. So this book is very much a polemic rather than a work of historical scholarship, meant to contribute original research to an ongoing consensus. Snyder has nothing new to say, rather he just cites the work of others whose research is convenient for him, while ignoring the inconvenient research. His argument for the Holodomor being intentionally designed to kill Ukrainians is just yet another rehashing of Robert Conquest's old, obsolete conclusions that the man himself renounced almost 2 decades ago. Snyder cites. So, as you can see here, Snyder said, the evidence of clearly premeditated mass murder on the scale of millions is most evident in Soviet Ukraine. The main source that he cites for this is Robert Conquest, yet Conquest renounced his conclusion, as I went over earlier, as new evidence became available. It's many of the authors who've argued that the famine wasn't intentional, yet nonetheless, like Neymark, just ignores their conclusions. He cites the parts that he finds convenient, then argues the opposite of them without actually dealing with their competing arguments, because he just really seems to want to compare the USSR to the Nazis and make it look like no possible counter-arguments to this even exist. Nonetheless, Snyder is still a serious historian, in spite of his recent incredibly embarrassing turn to writing books for a popular audience, such as bangers about how Donald Trump was a secret Russian agent, and also literally some sort of hybrid between Stalin and Hitler, the Hitler-Stalin or something. Anyway, so Snyder's book isn't very good at covering the Holodomor, but I think his opinion still merits inclusion in the Wikipedia article for the same reason Neymark's and Sunni's do. They're just adequate enough. So that is why I said that Snyder's book isn't a particularly great source on the same level as, say, Wheatcroft and Davies. One of those is a specific study on the Holodomor genocide question that goes into incredible depth, cites a ton of new information that wasn't previously talked about before their book, and deals specifically with all the counter-arguments to their position. Snyder's book does none of that. That is my exception to it. And you fail completely to accurately represent a single one of my arguments because this is written by AI.
The same geographic corridor. That's what Bloodlands is about. And here's the kicker. Bad Empanada says Snyder has nothing new to say, but Snyder is one of the few historians to have worked through both Soviet and Nazi archives in detail. That is new. That is serious.
What did he say that's new then? What did he say that's new in Bloodlands? What did he say in Bloodlands that you think is new? Tell us what. Just he worked with the archives doesn't mean that he presented anything new in that book or in his work on the Holodomor, which, as far as I'm aware, that's the only work that he's done on it. Where is the evidence? What did he present there that's new? What did he present that shaked up the scholarship? There's literally nothing. There's nothing. You're just lying. Like, you're proving to us that he presented something new by saying that he worked with the archives without actually telling us what new thing he presented. That's not proof of your statement. You're the dumbest fucker ever. A great example of British accent over substance.
Scholarship. In the end, this isn't about Wikipedia. This is about a guy who dislikes Western narratives, sees every historical interpretation as a geopolitical move, and replaces evidence with ideology.
I can't imagine, like, a better example of someone refuting themselves. You have to be fucking with me here.
That's why he dismisses genocide recognition as nationalist propaganda, even when it predates Ukrainian independence.
When I talked about genocide recognition, I talked about states, countries, choosing to strategically recognize genocides, like declare them genocides in, their legislature or the executive or whatever. That is obviously a nationalist measure. That is obviously a geopolitical move. You can't argue that it's not. So you don't even accurately represent my argument regarding that. What I said was that it doesn't matter if the USA or France or the Congo acknowledge the Holodomor as a genocide. What matters is analyzing the facts and the evidence surrounding that question. You got this from AI. AI lied to you. So now you look like a fucking idiot.
That's why he disregards every major scholar who doesn't fit his frame.
I literally went over every single person who was mentioned in the Wikipedia article as arguing against the genocide thesis. I refuted in depth when I thought they weren't valid, and I gave them credit when I thought they were. You were just a fucking moron. You do none of that here.
And that's the danger of this video. It isn't just wrong. It's seductive to a generation raised on distrust, who think every institution is lying to them. It preys on that doubt.
What else is there to say then that you're making a 7-minute long video that just relies on saying, dude, trust me? You're literally doing that here. You are doing nothing but sitting here and telling people what to think. You're telling them what the thing that you pertain to be refuting said. You're getting it wrong every single time. And multiple times you're clearly just lying and just blatantly wrong about what you're saying, and we're supposed to just trust you. That's what your article is.
To smuggle in denial. So here's my message to Bad Empanada's viewers. If you care about truth, start with the archives.
You can't start with the archives. They're not public. What do you think people should do? Go to fucking Russia and Ukraine and look at the archives themselves? You actually can't even do that. They're not publicly available. They're only given limited access to specific historians who request it. Start with the archives? What the fuck are you talking about? Is this what the AI told you to say? Just go and read the archives in Russian and Ukrainian, which you don't have access to, which you have to go and fly to read them in person because they're not digitized.
Not with a guy on YouTube who reads citations like a conspiracy theorist.
This guy argued that every single scholar who disagrees with him it's like has a conspiracy or something. And this is what he's saying.
Reading tea leaves. If anything's been manipulated, it's you.
Holy shit. I mean, this is the worst video I ever debunked. This is actually worse than Mentis Wave and the anime avatar Polish girl. This is unbelievable. I mean, what else is there to say? I don't even need to summarize this because I think we've said enough about this video and this guy. I think anyone who believed this clear AI-written slop, shame on you. You didn't even think to go and check whether this guy was accurately categorizing the video that he's talking about. And you don't even know enough about the topic to be able to know that he's just blatantly lying to you about it. Like James Mason, Robert Conquest thought it wasn't a genocide and then they changed their mind when the Soviet archives were open. Something that is the exact opposite of what actually happened in the case of Robert Conquest. Nothing more to say about that. That's extremely embarrassing. Bad Empanada debunks AI. Done.